moving on from there. So looking at your whole Ramadan as a plan, but having your end goals and the goals at the beginning and being okay if they change, as long as at the end of it, you're proud of yourself and you're proud of the Ramadan that you've had. That's really important. And so I would say that plan, but be quite open-minded about your own restraints. They say that if you are going to be competitive in faith, but also remember that, you know, you want to be physically fit and well to do that as well. So be quite realistic as well, inshallah.
Okay, so last question for both of you, wonderful panelists. Okay, what small steps, and just 2 points from both of you quickly, what comes to your mind instinctively? What 2 small steps can be taken in Ramadan to encourage self-development and growth, not just in Ramadan, but throughout the whole year? What are the 2 main things that come to your mind first, Sister Maaria, and then we go to Zahir?
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
Yeah. So I said, if you had instinctively to ask you a question, what 2 things in regards to self-development and growth would be done in Ramadan that you would say continue throughout the month? What are the 2 main things that you would say as take-homes for growth and development?
Okay, I would say number 1, being more mindful. So taking time out and reflection throughout the day. It's really important. I've had a very busy last year, and I'm really putting my eggs in this basket of Ramadan. And I know that's quite dangerous, but I really need this month. But definitely being more mindful and having those pauses throughout the day. And the other one would be, you know how we always say work smart? Or I need to do that in Ramadan. You know, we do say time, we don't have a lot of time, but we have enough to do what we want to do with it. So being smart with our time, I think I need to be a lot smarter with the time that I have and utilizing it well.
Alhamdulillah. And Brother Zahir, your final 2 points, please.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think mine would be get moving and make wise dietary choices.
MashaAllah. Beautiful. Absolutely. Thank you so much for everybody joining us for this panel. We're going to be concluding this program. Sorry that we actually went on a little bit later. Apologies for the technology sometimes not being on our side, and for everybody for being patient. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Have a wonderful Ramadan, inshallah. And may we all benefit from this profound advice from Sister Maaria and Brother Zahir. And I'm sorry that Shaykh Haytham couldn't be with us, but inshallah, I'm sure he's here within spirit and making dua for you all, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. So the RTP team is there another seminar going straight after this one now? Is the team on? Okay, alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Sister Atika. I will leave now as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everybody.
Brother Dowshan, are you there?
Assalamu alaikum. Right, assalamu alaikum all. I'm Dowshan Humzah. I'm here to present the second session of the day. I'd like to thank everyone who was in that first session, and certainly puts us in the right frame, I should say, to progress during today, and obviously as we look forward to Ramadan later this week. So thank you. So I'm Dowshan Humzah. I serve on the advisory board for Ramadan Tent Project, and I'm pleased to be hosting this session, which is looking at the cultural influence and our experience of Ramadan. We have 2 guests online, and unfortunately our third guest, Zia Eshandazaza, is unable to join us due to illness and loss of voice, which even in a virtual world would be a challenge. So we wish Zia well. And I have some contribution for Zia, which I'll try to reflect during the course of the conversations. We have 2 other panelists online with us. We have Farida Begum and Mustafa Briggs, if they can come online. I think I can see Sister Farida. I can see Brother Mustafa. Assalamu alaikum, both of you. And before you're unmuted, what I'll do is a quick, very brief introduction to each of you, and then set the frame. So Farida Begum is part of OMG Unite. That's not oh my god, that is actually the Omnicom Media Group, let me add, one of the big four holding media marketing agencies in the world. Farida graduated from SOAS here in London in Middle Eastern Studies, and then moved into advertising, which is not the typical move from somebody from SOAS, I would add, but having volunteered for a charity called Restless Beans, moved into advertising, where she then progressed, I think, particularly into digital and social media. Though I don't know if there's a slight affection for Mad Men and watching that TV series. However, she joined the team at Manning Gottlieb at OMD and focused on influencer marketing and influencer propositions, which is such a part of our lexicon now. And even as we talk about cultural influences of Ramadan and wider, it'll be interesting to hear Farida's perspective as we progress. Farida previously had her own influencer agency, which was Redefining, which focused on talent from multicultural communities. And in terms of brand names and guys online, we have some fabulous brand names between Sister Farida and Brother Mustafa. Farida has worked with clients such as You Should Have Gone to Specsavers, John Lewis, Estee Lauder, Odeon, L'Oreal, Dubai Modest Fashion Week, Starbucks and Sainsbury's. So great background, Farida. We're looking forward to your experiences. And in terms of the diversity of panel, we've gone from advertising to, I guess, academia, so to speak. And we have Brother Mustafa Briggs, who's a graduate of Arabic and International Relations from the University of Westminster, focusing on Arabic literature and literacy in West Africa. He also, there's like a big SOAS link, he also completed his Masters of Arts in Translation at SOAS here in London, specialising in Arabic and Islamic texts, before going on to the world-renowned Al-Azhar, Cairo, Egypt. I think that's where Brother Mustafa is now, where he's currently studying Arabic and Islamic law. Hopefully I'll get a nod on that. Yeah, thank you. But what marks Brother Mustafa out is his Beyond Bilal, Black History in Islam lecture series, which saw him explore and uncover the deep-rooted relationship between Islam and Black history, and the legacy of contemporary African Islamic scholarship and its role in international relations of the Muslim world, as well as the vital role that female scholarship plays in West African Islamic tradition. Brand names coming up, so please be ready. He's presented at over 30 universities across 3 continents, including Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and Yale. So we have some fabulous, diverse perspectives from the world of academia and the world of advertising as we approach this question. So if I turn to the panel now, and hopefully I'll save you from having to unmute, and you are unmuted. The question that I'd like to reflect upon, and perhaps have 5 minutes from each of you first before we open discussion, and I'll try and bring in some of Zia's perspectives as well as you both conclude in that 5 minutes. So if I start with Farida, how does culture influence our experience and memory of Ramadan?
Salam, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you, Ramadan Tent Project, for having me on today. I actually did reflect on the question. I tried to cheat. I asked Attica to help me. So where did the question come from? And she said it's more reflecting on the kind of diversity of Muslims, how none of us kind of celebrate Ramadan in the same way, and it's to bring that fact out. But I think for me, the way culture impacts kind of memory in Ramadan is the way we actually, the similarities of what we do during Ramadan is what brings us together, and that kind of sense of unity of it. I think there's like a dual aspect to culture when it comes to Ramadan. So there's the inherent culture of like what we get from our families, and then there's the experience of Ramadan that we've created for ourselves online, which I think all of us can say that has been an important aspect in the last 10 years or so. And it's not just like the last 2 years of how we've had to do iftar over Zoom, but it's more like the last 10 years of like, you know, during suhoor time, you know, Muslim Twitter being really, really busy, and then sharing recipes, and even in the Islamic aspect, like one of my favorite memories of Ramadan that's so poignant in my mind is like when Omar Suleiman started to do his 30 for 30 series on YouTube. And that for me, like I've tried to replicate it every year since, because that for me was such a beautiful addition to my Ramadan. And I think like that experience in itself, how we come together online to talk about what we're all experiencing together, is quite a beautiful thing. And I think like, and it's not just like what we have together, but it's more how other people perceive it as well. So like the working life and how it's perceived by our people in our office and our teams and stuff like that. But I think with that, and I to speak from an experience of working in the industry of advertising and working with brands on how to on how to engage with Muslims in during Ramadan. OMG Unite is basically a subsection of Omnicom, where we only focus on non-white communities and underprivileged communities, and how brands can tap into that. But me, for myself, and saying it from the industry, I do have a fear of like the increased kind of consumer Ramadan, and the impact it's going to have on our experience of Ramadan. So it's really cool to see how these brands are noticing us, noticing the spending power. But I think it's also really scary to see how our experience is being transacted for these brands to connect with us, and in turn sell our experience back to us. And I think it's going to water out the experience a little bit as well. And I am fearful of that, of how it's going to look in a few years' time. I don't want to compare it to Christmas, but you know how it's like the cookie cutter kind of experience. I don't want that to wash away due to the kind of consumer experience of Ramadan being reflected back to us. I think those are my thoughts.
Interesting thoughts there. And obviously you bring in consumerism. So that's one word that I picked up. You spoke about where you're at within the group and the focus on non-white communities. So from a UK perspective, let's say, or I use the term as well, underestimated communities. So underestimated maybe because of your ethnicity, your social background, your religion, or the way you dress. So we're going to pick up on some of those themes, particularly when you talk about cultural experience and how that cultural experience is changing in a digital world, and a world that's increasingly more connected through consumerism. So we'll park those for the moment, and I'm going to turn to Brother Mustafa. I'm not sure if Mustafa is in Egypt or here in London, but it'd be good to know whereabouts he is as he comes off the mic, and to get his thoughts on how does culture influence our experience and memory of Ramadan. Brother Mustafa, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah, alhamdulillah. It's a pleasure to join you all today from Egypt, as you correctly indicated earlier. And reflecting on this question, it takes me back to the verse of the Quran when Allah tells us that He has created us from a single male and female, and then He made us into different tribes and nations in order for us to know each other. So Allah says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَرَّفُوا. That He made us into different tribes and different nations and different peoples in order for us to be acquainted with each other. And if we look at the word ta'arrafu in Arabic, it's completely different from the word ta'allamu. Knowledge that's based on reading or knowledge that's based on preservation of information is called ilm. But knowledge that is based on the experiential and actual physical or spiritual activity that causes you to come into contact with the thing that you know and know it on a level of acquaintance is irfan. And so the word used is ta'arafu, in order to emphasize the fact that Allah has made us into different tribes, nations, cultures, in order for us to all come together under the banner of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and under the banner of the Quran, and know each other and discover each other's cultures and discover each other's differences in order to appreciate them. And so that's a direct command from Allah, and we see no better time for that than the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is a month that Allah has taken and given us specifically in order to draw closer to Him and in order to draw closer to the Quran, which was revealed in this month. As He says in the Quran, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. And so the fasting itself, Allah tells us, كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون, that He gave us this fasting in order for us to be conscious of Him. And so this consciousness manifests in different ways. It manifests in us fasting to demonstrate our consciousness of Him and the fact that we are putting Allah forward before any of our other actions. And fasting is an act that Allah says He is the reward for, because it's the only act that can be done sincerely for His sake. If you pray, for example, you could be praying for Allah, or you could be praying for people to see that you're praying. If you give charity, you could be giving charity for Allah, or you could be giving charity in order for people to see that you're giving charity. But fasting is the only act that is really between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you could be fasting and you could not. You could hide in a corner, eat a biscuit, drink a cup of tea and come out and pretend, as many of us did in our childhoods. But realistically, only Allah knows if the fasting person is truly fasting or not. So that being one of the best ways for us to approach Allah and worship Him in this month, Allah has also developed other ways, and we see that practiced in the culture of this month. And so I feel as though Ramadan is a beautiful time because it helps us to appreciate and understand each other's cultures. And then the whole theory of iftar, and I think Ramadan Tent was a big part of that, of bringing people together in order to share different cultures, is one of the greatest acts of worship, but we don't often think about how great it is. So we usually concentrate on the fasting, and we concentrate on the tarawih, and we concentrate on the recitation of the Quran. But just cooking a meal, providing food for a fasting person, and then bringing people for iftar is a great act of worship, and it's on the Prophet, which is a hadith Qudsi, where Allah says on the tongue of the Prophet, وَجَبَتْ مَحَبَّتِي لِلْمُتَهَابِينَ فِي وَالْمُتَزَاوِرِينَ فِي وَالْمُتَجَالِسِينَ فِي وَالْمُتَبَازِلِينَ فِي. Allah says that He loves, or He has made His love obligatory, meaning He has promised to love those who love each other for Him, and who sit with each other for Him, who visit each other for Him, and who spend on each other for Him. And if we're hosting an iftar, all of those four conditions are gathered in the iftar. Especially something like the Ramadan tent, where we see people gathering from different nations, different tribes, different cultures. A lot of them are not related. A lot of them do not know each other previously. The only thing that joins us is the fact that we're all Muslim and we all believe La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and we're all gathering together to worship Allah. So the first condition is fulfilled, that we are loving each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the gathering. Then the second one is visiting for the sake of Allah. We physically leave where we are to go to this iftar. Then we sit down. So that's the third condition. And we spend on each other. If we didn't spend for the food in the iftar, we spent money to get to the iftar. Gas prices have gone up crazy due to Ukraine. So everybody's spending even more than before. Or the Oyster card, or whatever you're using to get there. And so the cultural aspect, a lot of the times we might think of iftar as just a cultural thing, us gathering with our family, enjoying that time. But that love and that peace and that sakina that we feel through gathering together in the worship of Allah is just as much worship as the fasting, and is just as much worship as the prayers. Because the same way Allah says, salah, establish prayer, and the same way He says, sumu, fast, is the same way He says, kulu washrabu, eat and drink. All of those are commands of Allah. And so if we fulfill them in congregation, upon the spirit of gathering together in order to know each other and understand each other, and being united with the kalima, la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, then Ramadan, mashallah, is a beautiful time for us to experience that. And the culture that we have and we've developed in Ramadan helps us bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I think what you captured there, Brother, so thank you for being so eloquent there, and also for giving us the verses and translating as well for us there. But you captured some of, I'm going to use the word magic, captured some of the essence and the magic of the month of Ramadan, and the memories that have forged in us, whether you recount back to when we were all children and how we would act, we saw people fasting around us, or the magic that we experience as adults. And this is where I think you have a challenge. You rightly talk about we were all created from single male and female, and there are different tribes and different nations. And I guess our similarity is our diversity here. And we're united by more than just our means or our expectations, our faiths, our beliefs, but the conditions that you discussed towards the end of your 5 minutes there, the conditions that bring us together. And I must say, the magic of the Ramadan Tent Project, particularly with its open iftar, alhamdulillah, that this year we are gathering in person after 2 years online. But still, we managed to make memories and have a culture during the 2 years of online fulfillment. So being together with Ramadan Tent Project, bringing people together is part of that magic. Now, if I could take some of what you were saying there, the essence of what you were saying, and reflect back to Sister Farida. And again, you mentioned having gone through this digital revolution. We're not just talking the last 2 years, but the decade or so before that, and seeing aspects of Ramadan being becoming more consumerized. That's sort of changing probably the memories that we had. And I'm not going to talk about anyone's ages here, but perhaps a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades ago, or 4, when some of us here were children. So coming back to you, sister, in terms of cultural influences, our culture has changed dramatically with those 2 aspects of digital and consumerism. So how do you see that impacting Ramadan, the experience of, let's say, our children as we go forward?
Yeah, I guess, and I can only speak for those of us who have lived a pre-digital life, but you know, one of the things that our children won't get is having an experience that's quite innocent of digital, and people showing you how perfection of Islam is. Because when we were growing up, it was literally what our parents told us, or we went to mosque. It was quite a beautiful time, which was just within the 4 walls of our homes. But I think there's an increased pressure of perfection because of the digital world of, you know, I've worked in influencers. I'm not bashing them or anything, but, you know, the reflection of being perfect, the perfect Muslim, perfect, you know, perfect decor for Ramadan, and, you know, all of these things kind of build an impact for people to think maybe I'm not doing it right, or maybe I'm not capturing it as good as these Muslims online. And I think that's how it's going to impact our children, because it's like they don't have the purity of Ramadan anymore. They are being shown Ramadan in a way that's beneficial to the consumer element of these brands. And I think when you're being shown back a version of Ramadan, you lose the essence of as you said, what the magic was when we were growing up. Because
I think that magic was beautifully described by my brother Mustafa.
Yeah.
I think, you know, just moving on to Mustafa now, with your experience and having worked across a number of countries, and now being based in Egypt during a period of change as well, how would you suggest people hold on to that magic? I'm not saying necessarily fight consumerism, but be authentic, celebrate the differences that we have from our different tribes and different nations, and yet still hold on to that magic. What are your words of wisdom there?
I feel as though holding on to the magic of Ramadan, the best way to do it is to make sure that we're doing it sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's only the sakina and the barakah, so the tranquility and the blessings of worship, that gives you that same magic feeling. the fact that if we reflect on some of our growing up in the month of Ramadan, our resources might have been limited. We might not have been in the same financial positions that we are now. And we saw our parents or our elders or whoever struggle to provide Ramadan iftar and then share the limited resources they had just for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And some of those moments were more beautiful and captured more blessing than some of the elaborate and more commercial iftars that we have now. Even the origin of the Ramadan tent, for me, that was always magical because growing up, I didn't come from a Muslim family. My parents are Christian and I converted at the age of 13. So a lot of the time when my friends or, you know, other people that I knew had families that would cook iftar for them, I didn't have that, but I found that in the Ramadan tent where I would go as a teenager and have an iftar and be in an environment. And that all started, you know, fi sabilillah. It was a bunch of students who came together, saw a need for, you know, creating a community for people who were away from their communities. And they created the Ramadan tent, and Allah put his barakah in it and it continued to grow. So yeah, that magic is a sign of tranquility and it's a sign of blessing from Allah. So if we make the act for Allah, then inshallah, Allah can bring that magic back for us,
inshallah. I'm going to ask if there's any other questions, please, for participants to type those into chat. I do have a comment on there, which I will address. But I think, Brother Mufti, you talked there about doing it sincerely and being authentic. Absolutely. And I do want to anchor back to our host, the Ramadan Tent Project and magic of the Ramadan Tent Project. We've spoken about the Muslim perspectives, but I think the magic of the Ramadan Tent Project, particularly the open iftar, is that we bring lots of people together, different people, whether you're fasting or not fasting, Muslim or not Muslim, faith or no faith. There's just a great coming together of people, and the conditions that Mustafa, you were talking about, the elements of being authentic, sincere in worship, people get to see that in action. Many people who probably haven't had a break fast event, an iftar before, or have very limited awareness of Ramadan. So I think the cultural influence actually starts to play with organizations like the Ramadan Tent Project being, coming to your language now, Sister Farida, cultural influencers in spreading the message of Ramadan, and importantly, particularly in today's fractious world, bringing different folk together. Before I just move to one of the comments online, a very quick comment from you, Sister.
Yeah, I agree. I think I went to the Ramadan Tent Project Open Iftars years ago with my mum, and she still talks about it today as one of her favorite experiences. So I totally get it. I think the magic that we're speaking of kind of transcends the faith. As you said, it brings people together, and the experience of it, of people seeing Islam for what it is, and being displayed as through like giving and coming together is a really beautiful thing. And I think almost to what both of you were saying, there's probably like a calling to go back to how it was, of like the simplicity of Ramadan, and the intentions of trying to do it for the sake of Allah is really important. I do have to disagree with the cultural influence. I think there's we place too much onus and responsibility on these people to show what that type of Islam is. I think we're all kind of we've all got a responsibility to show that essence of Islam in our own way, without having to rely on people with big numbers online. We're all kind of influencers in a way. If we're going to open iftar with a friend of ours who isn't Muslim, we're influencing them to see the essence of Islam and the purity of Islam. So I think we have to take ourselves away of like giving more, because I think they serve a purpose of like, you know, selling what brands or whatever online, but I think in real life there's a purpose for us all to be influencers of Islam, to showcase that within Ramadan to people.
I think you're right though. I think you're right. You might be absolutely correct. The word responsibility can be broken down to its two constituent parts: the ability to choose your response So we do have an individual onus to choose our response, to be authentic, to show the values that Brother Mustafa is talking about, and to represent. I'm just going to close by moving on to Brother Mustafa as well for a final comment as well.
Alhamdulillah.
To reflect on that and what Sister Farida was saying.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I would say essentially the spirit of Ramadan is something that, because Allah has written the month for us as a ummah and put his barakah and put his blessings in, it's something that will forever be present. And even though the different enemies, such as, shaitan is locked up in Ramadan, but our own nafs, our egos and our desires and the dunya might try and destroy or taint the experience of Ramadan, the promise and the guarantee of Allah is always there. And for us as people who love the month of Ramadan and look forward to the month of Ramadan, Allah will never deprive us of his blessings and of the mercy that he wants to show us in this month. The fact that when the month of Ramadan comes, the doors of hellfire are closed and the doors of paradise are open, and Allah forgives more people in this month and takes more people away from the hellfire in this month than in any other month, it shows us that regardless of what obstacles might come to try and stop that, Allah always overcomes all obstacles, and our love for him and our love for his holy month, the month of the Quran, would help us do that, inshallah. So I pray that we all get to reach Ramadan safely and receive all of the blessings, all of the barakah, all of the tranquility, all of the forgiveness, and all of the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's available in this month. And may no one, inshallah, have a greater share than us, inshallah.
Wonderful word. Thank you again, Brother Mustafa and Sister Farida. And thank you for your thoughts and insights. I'll try to reflect some of Zia's background, who sends apologies again for illness not being able to attend, on how does culture influence our experience and memory of Ramadan. And it's a great second session as we move on through the day. So once again, Farida, Mustafa, thank you very much for your time and insights. I'm now going to introduce, I should say, the break. We're running a little bit behind schedule, so we'll be taking a short break of perhaps 10 minutes before we return for our third panel, which is focused on finance and charity. So please be back by about 2:35. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Hello, Assalamualaikum. Welcome back. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. Farah, can you hear me?
Hey.
Great. Okay, I think people are still logging back in as well. So we're going to be moving on to the next third panel discussion for today, which is around finance and charity. So we'll do a quick introduction to our three speakers in a bit as well. It'll be chaired by myself, Adnan, and by Farah.
Hey, Islam, everyone.
Islam. Great. And then we're looking to conclude roughly by 3 o'clock today, before we move on to the fourth panel, and then the conclusion for the whole conference itself. Okay, great. So I guess without further ado, the first speaker will be Nabeel Shariff from LaunchGood. Nabeel is the marketing director at LaunchGood, and until this year, Nabeel was chartered marketer and leading spokesperson in the Muslim-friendly travel sector, establishing and growing Rihala.com and Serendipity, tailor-made to their status today. He's a passionate traveler, an experienced marketer, and a learn-on-the-job dad. Nabeel continues to push the capabilities of the Muslim economy sector. Farah, on to you.
And next up we have Nizam. So Nizam, for those who don't know us, he has an OBE. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Algbra, which is a technology-based financial ecosystem dedicated to global financial inclusion, and does so by focusing on the underserved and the underbanked. Now, Nizam has a strong interest and background in overcoming the societal and economic challenges that prevent disenfranchised and minority communities from fulfilling their potential. He's a board trustee at SOAS, the University of London, and the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Centre in London. He is a Yale 2019 Greenberg Rod Fellow, trustee at the Aspen Institute, and former senior head of Mosaic and Community Integration at the Prince's Trust. Nizam was awarded an OBE in the Queen's 2020 Birthday Honours List, and this was for services to social mobility and community integration. Over to you, Adnan, for our next speaker.
Great, thank you, Farah. A third speaker will be Shazia Arshad from Islamic Relief. She's the head of communications and creative content at Islamic Relief UK. Shazia's background is in media and advocacy, having worked in the NGO sector for over a decade, with a range of different backgrounds and international developments and human rights organizations too. Before joining Islamic Relief, Shazia worked at the Ethical Tea Partnership, as well as helping to establish a number of volunteering organizations within the Labour Party, promoting equality and human rights. Great, so we have our three speakers. We'll get them to put their video on and see if they're online now.
And I want to say for great, everyone's already, and remember, for those who are joining us, remember to tweet, use social media, share the links, and any questions you have, post them in the chat box for either Adnan or myself, and then we'll present them to the host as well afterwards. So we'd love to keep the session interactive. So back over to you, Adnan.
Thanks, Farah. Yeah, great point there. Get the questions in, make this as engaging as you like as well. We have time dedicated for question and answers. Okay, great. So since all the speakers are here, the topic today is finance and charity. So there's really two questions that's posed to each speaker. We'll like to invite Nabeel to answer first. And the question is, how can spending influence spiritual sustenance? Followed by, is there a relationship between the two? So the first question, how can spending influence spiritual sustenance? Nabeel, on to you first.
Thank you, Adnan. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you very much for those introductions, and of course inviting us along to just to share our insights. I think when it comes to combining the spirituality around the act of giving, we're going into this period in Ramadan, which we all know is just exponential, not only in terms of the rewards, but also the engagement that we see from the Muslim community. And I think that as we move closer and closer to the first of Ramadan, and we see it within LaunchGood ourselves, we just see this huge uptake of a real dedication to create a link between the spirituality of Ramadan and also that act of giving. And I don't want to sort of state the obvious, I guess, but ultimately charity is such a huge part of our faith, and ultimately it also becomes a connection to generosity, and generosity sort of goes all the way through the core facets of our faith. I kind of like to look at the act of giving financially in relation to our spirituality, in relation to that act of generosity. So generosity comes in so many different forms. It comes in the form of simply opening your doors, simply having somebody over, and creating that hospitality. My background is hospitality, as you mentioned, so I'm gonna go down that line. When you do have somebody come into your lives and you are opening your doors to them, that hospitality element is as powerful as giving money to somebody. It's as powerful as giving something financial, tangible to somebody. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated that hospitality is for a day and a night, as good hospitality is for 3 days, and after that it is charity. So we see these links between that level of generosity and how it can affect your spirituality on a day-to-day basis. As we sort of go into Ramadan, we're going to see that exponentially as we go, especially in the last 10 days, obviously. And how we can really demonstrate that is not only based on the idea that we are giving, but also why we're giving, who we're giving to, the bonds of trust that we create between the money that we earn, the prescription of zakat, and the distribution of wealth. All of those 3 elements are so interlinked. It's a very, very powerful part of our faith, alhamdulillah. So just remind me of the second question. I don't want to make sure that I haven't missed it. Then.
Yeah, no, that's a good response so far as well. The second question is there a relationship between the two? So spending influence, how can spending influence spiritual sustenance? Is there a relationship between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think zakat is such a big example of that. The fact that we have a prescribed calculation on how to determine our wealth, what is viable and eligible for us to give as zakat, the 2.5% after all of the calculations that we have. Quite funnily, we just this week on LaunchGood, the team have just sort of wrapped up our zakat sort of activity, and we've done this cute play on what would Beyonce pay in zakat if she paid zakat. I know she might do, or Elon Musk or LeBron James, and the figures are staggering, obviously. But when you bring it back to the modesty of ourselves, we're not on LeBron James's salary, but ultimately that 2.5% is equal across the board, right? So that link between our sustenance, both physically, spiritually, financially, and the distribution of wealth is so intertwined. And like I said, as we go through this month, we're going to see that in leaps and bounds. We're going to see it, extend into Ramadan, and then of course we've got Zulhijjah. So it does continue as we go through the year. So I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely. Thank you. It's a good response. I've just been making notes on the slides. That's probably why you see my eyes rolling down. But I will pass on to Farah for the next speaker as well.
Same here, Adnan. So frantically scribbling down, you made some really good points and questions. So we're next going to pose the same question to Nizam. So how can spending influence spiritual sustenance? And secondly, is there a relationship between the two, between spending and spiritual sustenance? So over to you, Nizam.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you, Adnan. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Really great to be here with you again this year. Love what the project does every year. To this question, it's a very personal question and very relevant for me personally, because I spent more than a decade working in the charitable sector, and then about 15 months ago, moved into the world of finance. And so when I think about spending, I think about it in a much more broader sense than just charitable spending, which I'd love to share. And Algebra, as you very appropriately mentioned earlier, it's a sustainable, values-focused, Sharia-compliant fintech that we are working on. And I think the starting point, as has already been referred to, is money, wealth, everything else in the universe within our faith tradition is something that belongs to and comes from Allah. And zakat, being one of our obligated pillars, tells us that spending, because of course our wealth and money to charity is a form of spending, does fundamentally impact spiritual sustenance. Otherwise it wouldn't be such an important part of our creed. And more importantly, we're told that spending in this way doesn't decrease our wealth. In fact, it's replaced with better and greater wealth. And I think for me, when I start from that foundation and I think about what spending means within the context of our faith, there's obviously the obvious part of giving money to charity, creating an equitable society, having structures in place which allow the wider society to benefit, especially from those who are doing well, and that's a wonderful organic welfare system. But that intrinsic relationship between the two forces us as individuals, I think, to be conscious about wealth, money that we individually may be privileged to have, but equally to be more empathetic of the situation of others who perhaps may not be in such a privileged position. And I think that consciousness is something that I really wanted to focus on, because I think that consciousness of how we spend, what we spend our money on, is incredibly important. And I think it's one of the reasons why I certainly moved into the space I find myself in. It's something I think about in a very regular way. Now, prior to joining Algebra, I think it's safe to say I was intentional, but in the most bare minimum way possible about my spending, about my money. Obviously, you had your zakat, you had your core pillars, but there are layers to this relationship that is actually really interesting to me when we think about spending and spiritual sustenance. Immediately I can think of, in the context of where we are, if I gave money to the homeless, if I gave money to orphans, if I paid my zakat, if I consume halal products, if I take my money and go on Umrah or Hajj, those are all immediate things which transactionally give me the answer, yes, spending can influence spiritual sustenance, because I've literally paid for something which has allowed spiritual sustenance, and it says it in our faith that these are all things that will happen. But that spending, I want to take us and challenge us all to think about what that spending can be extended to. How can our day-to-day interactions, especially living in the system that we live in of consumerism, capitalism, and this monetary system that we live in, that we all engage in, that we all benefit from fundamentally, how can we take that consciousness into our day-to-day spending vis-a-vis spiritual sustenance? How are we making society better? Are we taking that extra moment of thought to buy that sustainable and organic choice, not just a halal choice, but a tayyib choice? Are we buying locally? Are we thinking about whether we need that extra food item when we go supermarket shopping, which might contribute to food wastage? These are all things which, for me, when I think about spending and sustenance, it's a much more holistic take on our sustenance. And I think those acts day to day, especially when we spend our money, can be seen as an extension of a form of ibadah, ultimately, especially when done with the right intention, which I think will have a positive impact on our spirituality and our sustenance. And if I go even one step further, when I think about the work that I've been doing over the last 15 months within the banking sector, the one thing I certainly did not really give any credence to is, each and every one likely has a bank account, and our bank account is likely to be with a high street retail bank, whether it's a Lloyds or a Barclays or whoever else. Now, when we deposit that money, so the conversation thus far is we spend actively, and we actively are cognizant of where our money is being spent, where our wealth is going. Is it charitable? What does that do for our spirituality? But I think if it's a scale of spiritual sustenance, and we really want to climb Everest on this front, I challenge us to think deeply about what happens to the money that we're not thinking about. So if our money is being deposited in a bank account, for example, do we know whether the majority of that deposit is being used by that bank in other funds and other markets? And those funds and markets, depending on choice, you may not be comfortable with. I'm not here to pass judgment. We each and every one of us have our journeys, and we will be held to account. But some of us may not be comfortable with the fact that that money is exposed to companies and industries such as weapons, defense, gambling, for example, and money is being made from there. Now, historically, quite practically, it would have been very hard for us to think about, okay, well, what can I do? I have no choice. And that's why I'm doing this. But actually, in the last, I would say, 5 years, with the advent and advancement of technology, you now have a number of provisions and propositions out there which are enabling us to think really deeply and offering us alternatives alongside demand from consumers, ethically minded consumers who are forcing institutions to be like, no, we want more. And that's certainly, something that we at Algebra have been working on. And I think, when I think about that, if we're on this journey of spending our wealth and our money meet spiritual sustainability, the spectrum is huge. It's massive. And I think it's, being aware and talking about it like we are now is just the beginning of the journey. And so I think those huge layers of the relationship that need to be really layered and peeled. And I think each and every one of us has a responsibility to really think long and hard about, how we get overall peace and spiritual sustenance vis-a-vis our spending. So I hope that's given a bit of an alternative approach to maybe just saying, it's obviously good for our sustenance to give money to charity and zakat because it's the right thing to do. But actually, there are things that I think we probably don't think about that actually having a bit more conviction and a bit more awareness might be beneficial to all of us.
Great, thank you, Nizam, and a lot of good points raised there as well. Definitely got the thoughts provoked, and I think a few questions coming in as well, which is good. We'll move on to the third speaker now, Shazia. The mic's all yours.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. And Islamic Relief are really excited about partnering with Ramadan Tent Project this year and this Ramadan. And I think the other two speakers have really touched on so much of the kind of interesting conversations that we've been having at Islamic Relief over the last few months about charitable giving and about how charitable giving has the impact really not just to improve lives kind of in the sort of traditional sense of projects and project development and the programs that we run, but actually it has the power to do so much more than that. And, one of the things that we have been looking at recently as we look ahead towards our Ramadan campaign is the power of our finances and is the power of particularly zakat. And some of you have seen our pre-Ramadan materials. You may know that that's something we've been looking at because what our analysis tells us that potentially zakat could have the power to end extreme global poverty. That's if all zakat donations were collected across the world. And that's incredibly powerful because that tells us that actually collectively we do have the power to kind of affect real change, and that's a wonderful, exciting prospect to be able to really change the most vulnerable communities' lives. But one of the things that we also know from the work that we do, particularly with kind of communities internationally, is that our money has the power to go further and it has the power to achieve even greater change. And it's very interesting for us because we run a number of programs in places like Kenya and Malawi and places where we see communities who are at the beginning of the supply chains. And in my previous role, I was really fortunate to spend time in places like Kenya where they are at the beginning of the supply chain of things like tea, a product that we all consume on a daily basis that probably many of us don't think about in terms of what does that actually mean for the tea farmer or the tea picker at the beginning of the supply chain, and how does our ethical consumerism actually impact their life. But actually, this is one of the very, very interesting things because ethical consumerism and deciding how to spend our money gives us the power to affect change in that way, because it actually gives us the opportunity to make consumer choices as consumers that will directly impact the tea picker or the cotton grower or whoever it might be at the beginning of the supply chain. And it's really, really interesting for us as we go into Ramadan, because Ramadan is one of our most charitable months for everyone in the Muslim community. Everybody is thinking about how many charitable donations they can give throughout the month, and that's a really exciting thing to be able to do. But the other thing is, it's also one of our most spendy months when it comes to socializing and seeing friends and seeing family, and particularly after the last 2 years, I'm sure many families and friend groups are thinking about getting together and the gifts that they can buy and the food and drink that they're going to be consuming. And so then we have to ask ourselves, okay, if we're spending this money, actually, how are we spending this money? And are we spending this money in a way that can really do some good and that can really have a positive impact, not just on our local communities around us, but on everybody that's in the supply chain and all the way through to the beginning of that supply chain? And that's a really, really interesting conversation to be having. And then when it comes to the kind of question around spiritual sustenance, actually, that's where it gets really interesting, because we know that charitable giving is a key part of our Islamic faith. But doing good is not just through charity, and supporting the most vulnerable is not just through charity. And this kind of ethical consumerism and these kind of ethical choices that we make with our money are exactly the kind of decisions that are going to help us decide, are we using our money in the best way possible? Are we able to affect the most vulnerable and the most needy? And it's really fascinating to think about these kinds of questions, because they're really quite fundamental questions. They go into the heart of some of the very deep-rooted transformational change that's needed across much larger economic systems. And we as a charity, as Islamic Relief, we're never going to be able to tackle those questions. And we will support communities everywhere around the country, everywhere around the world. But we know basically that there is more than one way to skin a cat here, and charitable giving is one way to do that, but also how we use the power of our finances in many other ways is also a really interesting way for us to look at that.
Thank you so much, Shazia. Some really interesting insights right now. We've had finance, we've had different aspects from the charitable sector, and I'm really conscious of time because we're running on to our next session. But just one question for each of you before we wrap up and head on to the next session, which will be chaired by Shelina. So we've spoken a lot about charity, we've spoken about spending, and very concisely, how can we spend to benefit the wider society and our communities in which we live? Because we do live in very diverse communities. So how can we spend to benefit our communities? And who would like to go first? Go to Nabeel.
Happy to jump in. I think it's a really good question, because one of just going back to the initial sort of question, linking the act of giving and charity to our personal sustenance and our own financial sustenance can sometimes get lost, purely because it's very difficult to see how that journey comes about. As soon as you sort of say, okay, I'm going to give X amount to this cause, and being able to sort of see that journey to the most in need can sometimes become very difficult to transpire. I know the old adage that charity begins at home it couldn't be actually more powerful than it is today. I was listening on the radio and to reading a few articles about the amount of poverty we have on our doorstep. Literally our neighbors could be in a state that we wouldn't even know about unless we had that conversation with them. So I think my answer to that would be, it doesn't always have to be where you make that connection with a cause or a demographic or a people that is way beyond the borders that you are in currently. You can literally look at your neighbor next door and create that connection and make your distribution of wealth ever more powerful. So yeah, that would be my take on it.
Thank you. And very quickly, Nizam, and then Shazia after as well. Nizam,
I'll try and be as quick as I can, and I'm really trying not to be self-promotional here. But I think one analogy I think about is so I grew up in East London, and there was a restaurant called Pando's, and Pando's was like meant to be a halal version of Nando's. And when I think about that question of how do we engage and support entities that benefit wider society, I think about, I want to support entities that benefit our community and wider society at the same time. And so when you're building out an institution like we are, we like to think about, instead of creating an institution that only, and there is space for this, where only serves one particular community only, and there is definitely space for this, rather how do we create spaces, institutions, which ultimately benefit wider society, but you have deep within it an inclusivity and inclusion, which definitely looks at the structural issues affecting why perhaps some communities, i.e. our communities, are currently underserved or missing. And so trying to find and source those entities that are trying to do all of this type of stuff at the same time, I think is one really easy way of supporting both societal benefit as well as our own community.
Thank you so much, Nizam, and over to you, Shazia.
Thanks so much. I think Nabeel touched on it really well when he was talking about sort of local communities, and one of the things that I think is so important is the work that we do locally in the UK. You know, charitable giving internationally, I think, is something that we're all really familiar with. But actually, charitable giving in the UK is so important, and the cost of living crisis, and you know how that is going to be impacting our next door neighbours, our local communities. You know, we've seen that more and more. We've been working with charity partners around the country, and particularly over winter. Everybody was telling us actually they've got a huge number of referrals, queues around the blocks, queues are bigger than they've seen for a long time, the impact of COVID, the impact of the cost of living crisis, and things like this. So it tells us that actually, as Nabeel said, the old adage is charity begins at home, and it's about making sure that we are supporting everybody in our local communities, as well as those internationally, everyone that we can. But I think it's also about making sure that we're making those efforts, and not just to ensure that we make sure that we are kind of giving those charitable donations, but it's also, are we calling for real change, and are we ensuring that real change can be possible for those communities? And so that could be through advocacy work, that can be through campaigning, and so it's about tying all of those things together as well, and making sure that real change actually comes about for everyone in a practical way.
Thank you. And with that concludes the third session and panel for finance and charity. Thank you everyone for being patient. We've just gone over a little bit. Thank you for all the speakers for joining us as well. Thank you to Nabeel, Nizam, and Shazia as well. We'll pass it on to the fourth panel, which is being chaired by, I believe, Shelina, Janmohamed. Thank you.
Hello and salam alaikum everybody. I get the privilege of chairing the final session of the Welcome Ramadan conference, and we are going to be talking about that thing that plays such an important role during Ramadan, which is community, and in particular social action. And the question I'm going to be posing to our panelists a bit later in this conversation is, what is a community and what is its role and impact on social action and service? Now, lucky for you, it's not going to be just me that's talking about this. I have three very prestigious, very experienced and highly expert panelists to discuss this question for us. So I'm going to introduce them, although I'm wondering if one of our panelists is not here. This is the kind of joy, not joy of the virtual conference. I don't have my panelists physically with me here. So let me introduce the two that we do have, and then when the hosts tell me that our third panelists have arrived, we can introduce her. So we do have already the incredible Neil Jameson and the amazing Desiree Chebeir. They have got so many accolades between them, I couldn't fit them all on one piece of paper, and I'm going to ask their forgiveness that I've had to squidge them in a bit. So you can complain to me afterwards that I've knocked off all the amazing things that you've done, but actually we want to really hear what you've got to say. So let me introduce you first. So Neil Jameson is the founder and previous executive director of Citizens UK, the largest and most diverse community organisation in the UK. He was responsible for establishing its Citizens Commission on Islam, Participation and Public Life. In 2018, he founded UK Welcomes Refugees, where he is the acting director, which welcomes and resettles refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, and most recently, of course, from Ukraine. He was awarded a CBE by the Queen in 2016 and is a member of the Ramadan Tent Project Advisory Board. We also have the equally prestigious Desiree Chebeir, who I've asked forgiveness if I pronounced that wrong, who is the managing director of ShareTheMeal, an award-winning app that works to save lives through democratizing individual giving. To date, donors have shared over 120 million meals with people in need across the world. ShareTheMeal is part of the UN's World Food Programme. Previously, if that wasn't enough, Desiree was a vice president at McKinsey Digital Labs in Dubai, Malaysia, and France. And she also sits on the board of Alumni Central, a non-profit focused on community knowledge building. I can't think of two better people to be in this conversation with us today. We are having a slight delay with our third panelist, Mujida Mabude. Technical issues are hampering her from joining us, but I'm sure as soon as she's on, she will be here. But without further ado, let me start by asking you, Neil, and then Desiree, what do you mean by community?
Assalamu alaikum and welcome, and thank you very much for having me on. It's great to be both in the advisory group of Ramadan Tent Project, to see a Ramadan Tent Project in action in the next month, of course, is great because we've all had to kick our heels whilst it was not. So grateful to be here and grateful that the COVID is not exactly gone, but we're learning to live with it. To answer your question, I really wanted to turn to the teachings I have had from my Muslim friends, particularly about what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has said about who are our neighbors. And as I understand it, what was happened, he was, as Jesus was, of course, wandering around, and people said, asked him difficult questions or seemingly difficult questions. Jesus, of course, as a Christian, said the most important thing you need to do is to love your neighbor as yourself. And Prophet Muhammad said roughly the same thing, frankly, which is when asked who your neighbor, he said the 40 houses to your left and the 40 houses to your right. And then when pressed on, so yes, Prophet, but who else are my neighbors? Who really are our neighbors? And he said the people closest to you. The teaching from there, of course, is he didn't say only the Muslims. So community is basically specifically for me, a group of people who are diverse, ideally, who have some things in common, which is quite important. That could be faith, but not just faith. It could be area, could be region, and so on. And then does stuff, acts together. We only know a community and when it acts. If it doesn't act, they're just a group of people going shopping. So I'll come back to that later when you have a second question for us, I think, Chair. But as I say, basically, my belief is a community is known for action, ideally social justice type action, and the more the merrier. Thank you.
Thank you. Desiree, what do you mean by community?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question ever since you've asked me what it is, and I thought of it in different stages. I thought of it of the most simple way, say pre-globalization way of doing this, and it was the people that were around you, your neighbors, probably your cousins, your tribe, so to speak, right? The people that they resemble you in the thoughts, more or less, in the way they looked, in the way they lived their lives, and that made it simple, right? Then globalization came around, and then we all started traveling and then taking on different identities and belonging to different communities, and we developed complex type of identities, but also ways of being, and community then became communities, right? I belong to the community of computer scientists, but I also those that worked on NGOs, in the NGO space, those that also spoke specific languages or came from specific background and then immigrated to a specific place, and different spheres of community started being formed. And one that stuck with me was the global citizens, the people that, have traveled in multiple different places and, they connected across the world. All that is to say is that really a community is a space, it's a set of people, it's a set of ideals where you feel that you belong, whether it's your only community or one of the many communities, it almost doesn't matter. The more, the richer, the more complex your interest and your, ways of interacting with the world, the more you'll have of those. And this is, I think, is just another way of feeling like you're multiple different beings in one.
I like that what's coming out from both of you is that there is a sense of cohesion, and there are some definitions around what community is, but they are not restrictive and limited, that you can be part of many different communities and you can define them in lots of different ways. And I think that's part of the richness of being an active participant in a community, which kind of brings me to the question of the panel, which is, if we think about those definitions of community, what role do they play, or possibly even how are they the setting for social action and the kind of service that both of you have certainly given in the work that your organisations do? I'm going to go back to Neil just so that Desiree can catch a breath after her fantastic answer.
Well, communities have a choice about what they do, of course. So first of all, we both agree on the idea that community should be diverse. It is people who have things in common, can be where they live, can be their faith. Ideally should be a mix of both. The other thing, of course, we have in common is we live in a world which is unfair. You could ignore that and say, well, let's pray about it or something, or you could act on it. And rarely in my lifetime there has never been a war so close to home as this terrible tragedy in Ukraine, for instance. There are wars in other places, and so that is enough to encourage us to act together for peace. Prophet Muhammad, your religion is all about peace, and we can't leave that to a few handful of politicians who negotiate together. We have to promote peace wherever we go. I'm a Quaker myself, and the one thing that distinguishes Quakers from other Christian traditions is that we are totally committed to peace, and that is our preoccupation. But so it is with Islam too. So social justice, very important. Choose your target and stay with it. The more that we can fight for the world we want, the world is not the world as it is, but we live in the world as it is, and we want to organize to get to the world as it should be. You see the difference, that the world as it should be, we never really reach, frankly. Maybe briefly we do. When in Ramadan you do reach the world as it should be, when the grapes are passed round, the dates are passed round, and everybody's together. That's the world as it should be. And then you go home and you see litter on the streets and you get mugged and people spit at you and so on. That's the world as it is. And we have to work together to make the world as it should be more real. As I say, there's plenty to choose from what you have to do. But if you just sit at home and worry about it, that's not very helpful for your mental health. If you just sit at home and say it's uneven, it's unfair, people don't like us, and there's no point in us doing anything, that's also a hopeless reflection of your great tradition, the great faith of Islam, which says we must act. All faiths say you are judged on what you do, not what you say. So that's why doing it is very, very important, and social justice is the way to do it.
I think that's a really interesting idea, that community is an action rather than just a sort of a state of existence, that you have to actually actively do community in order for that community to have any existence or purpose or role. Desiree, what do you think is the relationship between community and social action and impact?
Yeah, so I'm putting my ShareTheMeal hat on, my World Food Program hat on, and when I look at the stats internally and what's coming out of the different areas where we operate, I see that, for example, in the Horn of Africa, we have one of the worst droughts in recent history, and you have 13 million people that are severely food insecure in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia, right? there's a need for $4.4 billion to provide life-saving assistance, right? You've got in the Ukraine, so far on the ground, we've helped about 700,000 people, and we believe that number is gonna very quickly become in the millions just by the end of the week. So there is definitely the need to think about the community in the wider sense if we are to make an impact in this world, because what we do impacts everybody else. Climate change is not happening on a local basis. We are all part of, with the way we live it or don't live it, the way we consume or don't consume are impacting that person in drought in Africa or in New Zealand or what have you, right? So it is a social issue that is very much global. Now, we might be relating to specific groups of people that we feel that we want to help. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful. The point is, we need to help others. We are fortunate with just very little. We can make the difference between somebody who's leaving their family to go and get water or to get food in the next village or in hundreds of kilometers away, to come back to find that a fight has broken over a piece of bread, and then the family that they want to get water for is no longer there. So whatever anybody can help with, and this is the beauty of Ramadan, this is the beauty of Zakat, is definitely going to help. And it is a social imperative that we do that, whether we're religious or not, whether we do it within Ramadan or year long, whether we do it at a certain percentage or not, anything and everything will help and can help.
It's very hard to hear those numbers and the scale of the challenge. And I think I remind myself as much as everybody else that we have to start somewhere, and actually we can't feel overwhelmed by the scale of what lies ahead of us.
Yeah, if I can put a plug also here, and this is where ShareTheMeal came in. It's just with 80 cents, you can share a meal. Very few clicks on an app, you can share a meal. And I truly, truly believe that the people that are becoming a lot more active in we're changing, there's a paradigm shift in the way that global citizens are becoming more present and impactful in how we're changing societies halfway across the world. I mean, if you look on the app, we have people that have dedicated their wedding gifts towards fighting hunger in a country that they're not related to. We have people that are changing their birthday, whatever, or they're matching donations for other people just because they want to help. And it's beautiful, and it's heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time.
Just a point of administration for the audience. Unfortunately, Mujida won't be able to join us. Technology has beaten her. She's still part of our community, but sadly the virtual tech is not on our side. So apologies from her for that she's not able to join us. I want to take a minute to ask you, I guess, two questions that are always on my mind about participating in communities, and also if you want to take the chance in your answers over the sort of 3 or 4 minutes to showcase some of the work that you guys have done specifically in your organizations, which is, I think there are kind of two related questions, which is, in your roles you have been mobilizing communities, and much as communities are full of love and lots of energy, they can be quite challenging things to mobilize. So it'd be interesting to hear perhaps some of the challenges that you faced and the techniques you've learned in how to mobilize effectively. But I think also for many of us as individuals, not really knowing where to start and how to contribute in an effective way to a community, because I think there is a way that you can contribute that is more effective, and sometimes you can contribute and there is a reward for it, but actually it doesn't have the impact that you desire. And so what would be, based on the learnings you've had from your organizations, what would be the challenges of mobilizing community, but also the kind of challenges of being part of a community in an effective way. I'm going to come back to you, Desiree.
So from the work that I do, I think about mobilizing individuals rather than communities, just because of how precise we need to be and how we target digital, because we are just digital. We're not going out to the communities to speak. We have to think about who's seeing that ad. Is this ad going to resonate with them? Is it going to help me give them what they're looking for so that they're able to actually donate, right? And we've seen that there are different types of motivations for why people donate. Some people definitely donate because they see it as a duty towards God. It's something that they want to keep, not necessarily tell the whole world about, something between them and the creator, and they're super happy with that. They may be interested in a specific type of causes or unrestricted funds. We also have a zakat fund, so they can actually donate to zakat. They can do it once, they can do it multiple times. So it's definitely very flexible, and we let the data tell us what's resonating with who, so that we're able to offer what makes sense for the audience. There is another category of folks that are excited by sharing what they're doing. They're excited about telling the whole world that they're donating. And in a way, they become the cheerleader for the causes that they're actually advocating for. So they recruit their cousins and their friends and their Facebook followers and their TikTok fans, etc., to come towards the cause. Even whether they donate themselves or not, they become these champions. And we found that to be very effective as well. We also have some features in the app itself to do a channel in the name, anybody in the a corporate or a personal entity can actually create a challenge and then recruit other people to donate towards a cause. And then we have a different type of mobilization, and it's around the cause itself. And these are the folks that are passionate about vertical farming and alternative agriculture, or they could be passionate about a specific region or specific communal type of characteristics. So this is what we call the passionate givers, the ones that are not necessarily gonna give you the most, but they're the ones that want to be educated and that want to educate, and then they become the militant for that cause to try and advance it forward. So each one of them actually requires a different type of discourse and appeal, right? So that they're able to get motivated, and they in turn motivate others around them, some smaller circles and some much bigger, but that is basically how we do the mobilization with our digital functioning.
That's really interesting to think about, the fact that people come to the community with different motivations, and it sounds like a statement of the obvious almost, but with different skills and bringing different things. And in terms of mobilizing everybody, it's being able to understand and amplify where the benefits they're bringing, but also support them in the needs they have. So that's kind of very interesting perspective. Let me turn to you, Neil. What are the challenges of mobilizing a community, but equally, what are the challenges of being a good community participant? You're on mute. I've been waiting to say that all panel.
Dear, yes. Okay, well, you've got two examples here of change agents, and you see, is digital and relational. I'm going to try and summarize what the purpose of citizens is, and I'm sure this will lead to some criticism because I will take some shortcuts. Normally we do this in about 10 days, but in the short time we've got, I'd like to say that I spent 20 years, my first 20 years, not really understanding how change happens. I fortunately had another 30, 35 years as a result of some good teaching and so on, and very much experience to discover that the most important thing you need if you want to change things is power. And the sort of power we're talking about is obviously the power with people, not the power over people. There are two different sorts of power. The one people don't like is naturally power over, although I don't mind the police. And frankly, traffic lights are very important. They tell us when to stop. But for the rest of the time, looking at power with people, how do you get it? So the model that Citizens has used, and I found invaluable, is to turn to our institutions, our mosques, our churches, our schools, our university groups. People in groups are much safer than people on their own, in my experience. I mean, relationally. Obviously, digitally, it's different. But people on their own, lonely, shouting, social media, ranting stuff is unhelpful. Whereas people in a group, like a mosque, and because the only groups that can join Citizens are institutions. We made that decision 30 years ago. It has served us well because institutions do have things in common. They meet regularly, they raise their own money. They mostly, particularly faith, of course, are set up in order to promote a better world. But it's a losing battle if you do it on your own, really. It's not impossible. 10 people can do more than one person can. But basically, if you can build an alliance, which Citizens has managed to do, of hundreds of institutions who sign up to a way of behaving, which is always non-violently, it's always polite, but it does mean turning out, not in a demonstration, but as a powerful body to persuade politicians to take us seriously, to persuade the world, the media, and so on to take seriously the very carefully crafted political position, non-partisan political position that Citizens has managed to take on a series of things. Specifically, you asked us for some examples. I think, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing two examples, which is the flag of Ukraine. The plight of the Ukrainians is terrible. As I say, I've never lived through a war so close to home as this one, and so violent and so unnecessary. Very similar, of course, to the Syrian conflict. I was involved in receiving lots of Syrians through a program called Community Sponsorship of Refugees, and that did quite well. We had 20,000 people come and settle in the country, but now there is a shortcut which has come our way through the government, and that this is for people to take Ukrainians into their home. We are particularly working on that in rural Devon now, where I now live, and I would encourage everybody to do something to help the Ukrainians. And the privilege of having people in your home is a risk, but it's also a privilege, and think about it. But don't forget the Afghans. The Afghans are now left stranded in hotels. I know quite a lot, and we are equally working to try and get the Afghans out of hotels, but there's no question they've been ignored now by the journalists, partly by the government, because this other urgent matter has come our way. I know there is some criticism in the community that what's wrong with us Muslims, and we have to take that on the chin. But basically, I'm arguing for all people who are refugees to be helped. It's a perfect thing for any small group to do, not necessarily just feeding them, but standing alongside them and improving their conditions and getting the Afghans out of the hotels, but getting the Ukrainians out of war situations where 4 million people are now left, 7 million people have been displaced, 4 million people are refugees, and they can come to Britain. Admittedly, we have put up more hurdles than any other European country, but we have to get round that. So I would say the most urgent thing is to help our brothers and sisters who are in a plight that we could be for us if we were born somewhere else. So the lesson is, it's all a question of luck where you're born, which is why you have to think, there but for fortune go you or I. And I leave you with that recommendation, but also let's work to make the world a better place, which is why Ramadan is so important. It's an encouragement of Ramadan to think and reflect and then go out and change the world. It isn't carry on thinking and reflecting indefinitely. It is get your act together, build your team, get your mosque into a membership of an alliance that has peaceful plans and has a track record for changing the world. Thank you for this opportunity.
So thank you, Neil. That segues nicely to really a closing question for the closing panel of the Welcome Ramadan conference, which is, Ramadan is coming next week, and it is, explicitly a time of great community. And I think after 2 years of lockdowns and constraints, even though there will be caution this year, we'll certainly be returning to something that feels much more like the community that we're used to experiencing in Ramadan. Just a short thought to leave people with, and I'll turn to you first, Neil. If somebody could do one thing or two things to really play a role in their community and create some kind of initiative for change or participate, what would you suggest that they do?
That is tough. I would return to what I'm suggesting. I think the most urgent issue is to rescue mothers and children in Ukraine, and to rescue mothers, children, and family stuck in hotels. Working out best ways of doing that. I'm very happy to help. We have plans and so on, but we need allies to help make this happen. Check out where the Afghans are. They are in hotels in many communities, and they are desperate. They've been in there 7 months now, and in hotel rooms. It's costing Britain the earth. They want to get out. The Ukrainians don't want to come, but they can come. So I would focus on the issue of refugees. Do something, be kind. They don't want clothes, don't particularly want money. They want to be free, to go about their business, to have a home, or to share a home, so far as the Ukrainians are concerned.
And Desiree, I'm going to give the final word to you. What can give us something that we can do practically in Ramadan to build community and have an impact?
Absolutely. So I think that just going back to what I was saying, community is different for each one of us. And I believe that Ukraine is a perfectly fine one. There is a gazillion others. Unfortunately, the world needs all the help that it can get, be it Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Philippines, what have you. Every place where there was a disaster, even when they stopped being sexy in the news, but it takes time to rebuild. It takes time to actually bring people back home, to get things back to normal, to rebuild themselves up. So figure out what you're passionate about, run your Google search, and then be involved. Figure out how much you're willing to donate or to help with, and it could be money, it could be time, it could be services, it could be connections, it could be anything. And then, hey, if you run out of ideas, come to ShareTheMeal. We have a gazillion channels that you can contribute to, or campaigns, or you can set up your own. You can even gift a meal on behalf of somebody else. You can have the app notify you so that you do that at a certain time. I mean, it's all in there. So 80 cents can get us going. We also have a website. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Desiree and Neil. I think what's coming through very loud and strong all the way through the questions is, as you both said, is get involved, find your passion, make that bit of difference that you can do. And community is not a state of existence, it's an action that needs to be carried out every day by each of us. So it just leaves me to say thank you to both of you, to Neil and to Desiree, for your incredible contributions. Thank you for today's panel, but particularly thank you for all the hard work that you do behind the scenes, and which we've just had a small snippet of. And my thanks to the organisers of the Welcome Ramadan conference, because this is me signing off saying thank you to all of you for listening, and handing back over to the host to close the programme.
Thank you, loud and clear. And from our side as well, it's been a good conversation so far. From 1 o'clock, lots of things discussed. We've really enjoyed it. I hope you at home have also benefited and enjoyed it as well. We've been through 4 different panels today, from starting from health and well-being, going on to culture and Ramadan, then taking a break onto finance and charity, and then concluding just now with community and social action. So from our side, it's thank you for all that attended, made time for us, engage with us, and to our speakers that joined today as well. I'm sure we'll get another chance to see you guys, inshallah, very much in person when we have these the tent going up soon as well. So thank you to the panelists, to all the chairs that spent their time for the insights and the food for thought. We've left us a lot to prepare for Ramadan, and we're looking forward to next week. And important, I guess, admin from our side as well is that, don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at Ramadan Tent Project. You can find us on Instagram too as well. We keep all of our information up to date over there with what's happening going forward, especially as Ramadan 2022 commenced us to as well. So inshallah, we will see you all in person or at our virtual iftars that's taking place this year as well. Farah, on to you.
Thank you so much, Adnan, and thank you so much to all our chairs today, all our speakers, all our panelists. They've given us such food for thought and some insights that inshallah we can take forward, not only in Ramadan, but moving forward as well. And thank you so much for all the participants who have joined us today and getting involved and joining in the conversation. And we want you to keep doing that. Please keep doing that. Follow us on our social media, Ramadan Tent Project, also on Instagram, tweet about us. If you're based in the UK, make sure you come to one of our in-person events, the first time in 3 years even, since we had our last one. So the last 2 Ramadans we've been on Zoom, now we're back live. So join us for those. If you can't join us for those, join us at one of our open iftar events. Make sure you get one of the packs as well, the Ramadan packs that are going to be coming through very shortly. And we're looking forward to continuing the conversation during Ramadan. And before we close today's conference, we're going to just reintroduce Mustafa Briggs. Mustafa is going to very kindly do a closing dua for us. So Assalamu alaikum from me.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to Allah who has gathered us here today upon His love and in remembrance and in preparation for His holy month, Shahr Ramadan, the month in which the Quran was revealed, alladhi unzila fihi Quran, as a guidance and a clarification and a separation of good from evil. Hudan linnas wa bayyinati min al-huda wal furqan. And so we ask Allah to bless us in Sha'ban that we are currently in and allow us to reach Ramadan as the Prophet ﷺ would make dua, Allahumma barik lana fi rajabina wa Sha'ban wa balighna Ramadan. And may He allow us to be amongst those who reward in Ramadan isn't merely hunger and thirst, but is Him Himself subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He says in the Hadith Qudsi, or as the Prophet ﷺ has narrated to us, that Allah has said that fasting is for Him and He is the reward. So may Allah reward us with Himself, with knowledge of Him, with closeness to Him, with taqwa of Him, with ma'rifah of Him, and accept all of our fasts and our worship. Give us long lives and good health in order for us to make the most of the month. And may we be written amongst the muttaqeen, as Allah says in the Quran, Kutiba alaykum as-siyam kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. Because the only reason that He has made us fast and the only reason He has given us the month of Ramadan is for us to be amongst those who are conscious of Him. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad al-Fatih lima ughliq wal khatim lima sabaq nasir al-haqq bil-haqq wal hadi ila siratika al-mustaqim wa ala alihi haqqa qadrihi wa miqdarihi al-azim. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Alhamdulillah.